Hello and welcome to the Dynasty Guys Fantasy Football Podcast. We are your hosts. I'm Tim Goins, along with Eric Calvert and Adam Dolan, and we are the Dynasty Guys. Hey, we're 6 weeks into the 2019 NFL season. What's the most interesting thing you guys are seeing so far?
All right, I'm going to start with a very heartbreaking story that I'm sure has happened to others out there in the fantasy football world. So I'm playing in a league last week, and it's an NFL league, so our defenses are set up to where you start with 18 points or so, or I think it's 18, and you lose points for yards. So every 100 yards you lose 3 points or whatever, and then for points also. So I'm down by a point, and he has the Detroit Lions or the Green Bay Packers defense. So I don't know if you knew how many yards that the Lions ended up with on offense, but it was 299. And I'm going to remind people, if they didn't get to watch the game, at the very end of the game, Green Bay has the ball, 3rd down and goal, or 3rd and 8 or whatever, and they call a hands to the face penalty on the defensive line. And it extends the game, lets them kick a field goal to end the game. So right there, I knew watching the game, if they hold them right here to kick a field goal, Detroit's going to get 1 yard and I'm going to win this game. And all of a sudden, the refs screw me out of my fantasy victory. So I just had to tell that story for all of you people that suffer from week to week because of the refs. So I should have beat him anyway, but it was very tragic.
It's 100% the refs.
It was absolutely tragic.
It was unfortunate.
I brought that up last week about the challenging of the pass interference, but we were talking. I was nervous that when we first had that introduced into the NFL, that it's going to open Pandora's box. I mean, why can't Detroit now say, well, that play literally lost us the football game? I mean,
right.
That play didn't give us a possession at the end of the game.
The thing is, it wasn't that play. It was 4 plays.
Right.
I mean, it was incredible.
Right, but you can point to one direct play.
Yeah.
Say this is absolutely not, and Booger McFarlane or whoever that guy on Monday night was obviously right, saying that that's clearly not a penalty, and if challenged, that wouldn't have been a flag, and it probably would have changed the game. So I just mean you can directly point at that, and that's what I hate about the new challenge rules. So anyway, but off my soapbox.
Yeah,
I'm still bitter about it.
Need to underlie some sad violin
yes,
there.
Well, I'm glad my wife is a therapist.
Yeah. Okay, so the thing I just kind of want to talk about the struggling Rams offense, and really what it comes down to is the struggling offensive line. Evan Silva put out this tweet of their starting linemen. So their left tackle is their best lineman, and he is ranked 32 out of 75. Their left guard is 76 out of 77. The center is 31 out of 33. The right guard is 72 out of 77, and the right tackle is 74 out of 75. They basically have the worst offensive line in the league. And what's interesting is if you look at the last 3 games, Goff has only been sacked 6 times, and 4 of those were against the 49ers last week. So you keep hearing this talk about McVay and the Rams seem to have lost something, and maybe he's not quite that offensive mind that people were expecting, after what he's done in the past. And I might argue the opposite with how bad this line is, that they haven't just completely imploded. I think they're actually doing pretty well. It will be interesting to see as the year goes on if Goff can, get a little bit more protection. Maybe they can do some stunts to make that line a little bit better, but that's a lot of the reason why Goff has been struggling recently is that line is really bad, and for whatever reason, it hasn't had the publicity that the lines of, the Bucks or, the Texans, the Bengals, all those people seem to be getting when, from the looks of these numbers, this has to be the worst line in the NFL.
Right.
So I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah. So I noticed the Dolphins went for 2 at the end of the game with the Redskins. So do you guys think that they were actually trying to win it, or were they raising the odds to try to lose it?
Well, I think they were trying to win it. I know that the theory is they're trying to lose, but why do you make a quarterback change in the middle of the game if you're not trying to win? I mean, that's my only theory. I mean, we see it a lot where they go for 2 at the end of the game when you're struggling and you do not want it to go into overtime. You just don't feel like you have the better squad out there. So.
Yeah, I think they were trying to win it, but I think they probably have the attitude of, whatever happens. If we win, cool. If we lose, not that big of a deal.
Right.
Yeah. Another interesting thing that I noted was Terry McLaurin. I actually listed him last week as a cautionary tale to play because I really felt like with the change of coaching there, he was going to get fewer looks, less production. And I was right on the fewer looks.
And you were right about Adrian.
Yeah,
14 and a half
and
points.
Adrian had a good week. What I wasn't expecting was for McLaurin to catch 4 balls for 100 yards and 2 touchdowns.
Yep.
That's pretty productive. So, I think he's pretty safe going forward, even if he did half of that. I think you'd be happy. So,
right. And that's no anomaly. I mean, he has been
great.
Good all year long.
Yeah, he's been great. The other thing that I have found interesting, and it's built up to this, is Kyle Allen's production. I mean, he's won 4 consecutive starts. He has a 65% completion rate, 900 yards, with 7 touchdowns and no interceptions. And if you add his 1 start in last year, he's 5-0 in his last 5 starts. So if you're the coach of the Panthers, I mean, we hear talk of Cam coming back, and I think it's still kind of iffy if they're thinking about playing him. I mean, what would you do if Cam's healthy? Do you put him in?
I would not put him in. I mean, when you're on a winning streak of they're 4 in a row this year, I don't see, and let's say it's 6-0 or 7-0 by the time that Cam comes, if they can maintain this streak, I don't see how you can break up that the way that team is gelling.
Yeah.
Just because your quarterback that has done well in the past is back. Cam Newton hasn't looked good in 3 years, and I know a lot of it is health related, but he keeps coming back saying he's healthy, and clearly he's not. So if he comes back and says he's healthy and he looks bad again, is he really healthy or is he injured? And to me, I think you have to continue with the hot hand, which is similar to the Dak Romo situation.
Yeah, I was just going to bring that up. But I will say, there will always be that what if in your mind. I still have that what if Romo were still there. So yeah. I definitely think that the right decision was for Dak to move forward and for Kyle Allen to move forward. I think that's the right choice as the team. But I will say that I'm sure fans and ownership are always going to have that thought, well, a healthy Cam Newton could mean a lot more to our football team.
He could.
It'll be interesting. Oh, go ahead.
No.
I was just going to say it's going to be interesting to see how Ron Rivera handles the press, because normally with this kind of stuff, he gets all bent out of shape instantly. So we'll see what he does.
Right. Yeah. All right. Well, hey, that's what we found interesting so far. So we're going to get started with the rest of the show. We have a great show for you today. We have injury updates, roster moves, trade targets, player projections for your Dynasty team. And last but not least, we're going to finish with our player projection segment called the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. So stay with us. But first, we want to remind you that for this upcoming week of the NFL season, the Carolina Panthers, Cleveland Browns, Pittsburgh Steelers, and Tampa Bay Buccaneers are all on bye. Also there's no early games in England this Sunday, so we don't have to worry about getting up early and finding any injury updates or anything to your players. But we do have a Chiefs-Bronco games on Thursday night, so be sure and get your players ready for that game. Always remember on the early games, whether it's a Thursday game or an early Sunday game, put those players in any positions other than your flex. Leave your flex available to make those changes at the last minute, if there's injuries or substitutions or anything like that come up. So anyway, let's get on with the show. We're going to start with the injury report and roster moves. Eric, why don't you get us kicked off?
All right, so as always, we're going to start with the Rams. It's a bad week to be a Rams running back, apparently. Malcolm Brown did not practice. And I want to say this is Wednesday afternoon. Most of the data we have is it's Thursday afternoon. Most of the data we have is from Wednesday's practice. So keep that in mind if things change. That's because of when we recorded this. So Malcolm Brown did not practice Wednesday, and Todd Gurley had a limited practice Wednesday, and they're saying that he has a chance to play in Week 7. I don't know what that chance is. I think it's kind of unlikely based off of the way that things have looked and kind of the talk going around camp. And if that is the case, Darrell Henderson is going to be a great start this week. A lot of people picked him up pretty early in their rookie drafts, so this could be the time that he actually gets a chance. And if they're both out, if Malcolm Brown and Todd Gurley are both out, I think you can start him this week with confidence against the Falcons.
I hope you're right. I have Darrell Henderson in our league of record, and I have 7 players on bye and 1 injured, so I need a running back.
All right, there you go.
Well, and just a tidbit to add about him, I think he's a great trade target in a dynasty fashion. I mean, we had talked about this before with Todd Gurley's injury, but it's not one of those, it's not like a soft tissue type injury. It's more of a knee arthritis type injury that as the season goes on, those things don't get better. I know no injury gets better as you move on, but this is one of those almost degenerative type diseases.
Well, it never gets better, even in the off season.
And it's just one of those things to where nobody knew how his body was going to react week after week after week and how he was going to recover. And I think that from what we're seeing now, it's a good sign that it's a bad sign for the Todd Gurley owner, a good sign for the Henderson owner. So I think it's somebody, if you can go out and get them cheap before he starts to basically take over that role, even if he shares it with Brown, I think that he's definitely a startable target, or definitely a good target.
Well, they definitely utilized him more in the passing game, which was good to see last week. So I hope they can continue to do that.
Well, I think they're going to have to, because as we just talked about, their line is terrible. So you kind of have to get rid of the ball quickly most of the time.
Screen.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, so let's move on. The Cardinals, Christian Kirk still really, I don't think he even has a chance of playing. What they're saying is he's closer than last week. Well, that doesn't really tell us anything, but he hasn't practiced. I would expect him to be out. And David Johnson did not practice on Wednesday with an ankle injury. So monitor that. He's had a lot of nagging injuries and seems to play through them so far, but just keep an eye on it. And again, it seems like I say this every week, but if Chase Edmonds is available, pick him up because
he just looks good too. Oh
my
gosh.
Well, they both had some good production this last week. So
and they're starting to do 2 running back sets with them, where it's not one or the other.
A lot together,
yeah, which is interesting
for sure.
Okay, the Seahawks. Rashad Penny is questionable. What's new? Rashad Penny's always questionable. I don't know that it matters either way because you can't start him and you're starting Chris Carson. So just throwing that out there. And then the big news out of the Seahawks camp is Will Dissly is out for the season with a ruptured Achilles. Tim, the tight end Reaper, strikes again maybe there.
Yeah. No, I didn't touch him.
Okay.
I wanted to pick him up.
Actually, nobody touched him on his injury. It was a non-contact injury.
Yeah,
so
that's sad though, because he really looked like he was coming on.
Oh, yeah.
And we kind of had this conversation earlier. Adam and I did. If someone drops him, he's worth holding on to, in my opinion, in a Dynasty League. Pick him up for hopefully cheap and hold on to him through this injury. It's going to be all year. It's going to be a long injury, and you're going to feel like you can drop him, but I think he's going to continue to have this production as long as he can be on the field, and that he's shown that he can be a valuable weapon in that offense.
Well, it's like we always talk about when you're making trades. Keep these players in mind because you can package them with another player when you're making a trade.
Yeah.
Because the owner of him may want to free up roster space or something. They may not want to hold dead weight. So sometimes they're an easy catch in those situations.
Well, particularly if they have another good tight end.
Right.
If someone has a Hunter Henry and that just worked out really well for them, that Hunter Henry came back and Will Dissly is out, they may be a lot more willing to get rid of him.
Yep.
Right.
Good point.
Well, and I'm going to give a good comp too, because I think Will Dissly in his situation at the end of the year is going to remind me similar to Cooper Kupp's situation. It seemed like people almost forgot how productive and how good Cooper Kupp was. I mean, we saw somebody in our league get rid of him. It's a 10-keeper league in one of our other leagues, and it's a 10-keeper, and he got rid of Cooper Kupp. So it's really easy when somebody goes down for a year-long injury, at least if it's the last half.
He also kept Corey Davis over him. So
That's a good point. But still, you see what I mean. And that could definitely happen with Dissly.
Yeah.
It's very easy to forget how much production he had in the first few weeks. So.
Yep. With that said, Luke Wilson now becomes somewhat fantasy relevant. I'm not going to say he's going to be great or do what Will Dissly did, but Luke Wilson is an option that you may want to keep your eye on depending on what happens. And then on top of that, they also have Ed Dixon, who looks like he's going to come back in a few weeks, so that may muddy the water a little bit, but just keep an eye on that. Moving on to the 49ers, Deebo Samuel is day-to-day with a groin injury. Again, don't know if you're starting him or anything, but just something to see. Raheem Mostert did not practice Wednesday with a knee issue. He hasn't played much since Coleman and Breida's back, so really not a big issue there. And kind of a weird one, George Kittle did not practice on Wednesday for undisclosed reasons. I don't know if that was a personal issue. I don't know if that was an injury issue. I don't know. Well, I think it's Wednesday.
Okay.
So, if we had the injury report for today, hopefully we would know a little bit more. But that was just kind of strange, so definitely keep an eye on that. Moving on to the Texans, Hopkins and Fuller were both limited Wednesday. I think they're probably both going to go ahead and play, but, something, again, keep an eye on. For the Colts, Paris Campbell is out. The ab injury, same injury he's been out for a while, so don't expect him back. The Titans, Delaney Walker had a limited practice, and he's about the only guy outside of Derrick Henry that you're worried about in that offense. So if you, again, in this tight end landscape, if you have him, you've been okay. But
what about Tannehill? I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Yeah.
You don't think he's a streamable option or a startable? You don't What do you think about
Tannehill?
Tannehill? What do we think?
No, I think he is basically going to do the exact same thing that Marcus Mariota did personally. But
I think he's better than Mariota, but or Mariota, however you want to say it, tomato.
Right.
I worry about the way that they play the game. There just seem to be more of a defensive. You have a defensive-minded coach. Doesn't seem to be an explosive offense, other than he likes to run the ball.
yeah,
I mean, he throws some, but it's to set up the run, not the other way around. So, but I'm interested to see, because I do believe Tannehill's better.
I'm not so sure that he couldn't be the quarterback you drafted Mariota to be. I mean,
I agree with that.
I mean, we draft Mariota to be what? The Dak Prescott of old, the high flourish. He's got he can still run, and he's still going to complete the ball. I mean, they're still going to move the ball. They're still an okay offense. So I don't think maybe we expect the ceiling that we hope for Mariota. But
no, I don't think you're going to ever reach that ceiling with Tannehill. But I do think Tannehill could be better for the receiving options on that team.
Right.
But we just don't know. We haven't seen it yet.
Maybe Corey Davis is going to come out and be a star.
Maybe that Cooper Kupp drop will be worth it at the end of the year. Who knows? Okay, so the Jaguars, Josh Oliver is still questionable. If you don't know who that is, he is their tight end who seems to be pretty athletic and looks like he would be a pretty good tight end if he could play.
Rookie tight end.
Tight end, yeah. He was limited on Wednesday, so he is getting some practice in, but nothing yet for sure. The Packers, basically the entire wide receiving core is injured right now. Geronimo Allison is out with a chest injury and a concussion. Devontae Adams has what is basically turf toe, it sounds like. They haven't really said that, but that's what it seems like. MVS did not practice on Wednesday. He could play, it's possible, but he's probably the most likely to play out of them, but it's not for sure. And Jimmy Graham did not practice on Wednesday. So all that said, Allen Lazard had a pretty good game last week, and we'll talk about him a little bit later, but I think he's someone you can keep an eye on, especially in that offense that could really have a breakout here before too long. Okay, moving on, the Bills, Devin Singletary looks like he's going to make his return in Week 7. A lot of the talk was he probably could have went in Week 5, but they held him out just to make sure, and I hope that's true as a Singletary owner. I hope he's 100% healthy and we can count on him for the rest of the year. And then John Brown was limited in practice on Wednesday, but I actually did see this morning that he practiced on Thursday. So it looks like he's going to play, but definitely keep an eye on it. And then lastly, for the Jets, Chris Herndon is still questionable with that hamstring injury. Really nothing new that has developed on that. So,
okay, I'm going to talk about the Panthers just a tiny bit, even though they're on bye this week. They waived the wide receiver Ray McLeod, and although I'm sure he wasn't on your roster anyway, but he had 6 fumbles in the last 3 games, so that led to his departure. And of course, Cam Newton, as we kind of talked about at the first, is starting to practice a little bit, so we'll see how that fares. But for the Broncos, Drew Lock is starting to practice again. He's moving along and rehabbing his thumb injury. So it's doubtful he's going to get any playing time, as long as Joe Flacco's playing well. But if you're in a dynasty league and you have Drew Lock, at least there's maybe some hope on the horizon that he'll see the field someday. Patrick Mahomes, of course, retweaked his ankle for the Chiefs in the last game. He's still expected to play, though. Sammy Watkins probably not going to play tonight, is what I'm hearing. So for the Chargers, they promoted a new wide receiver, Jason Moore, to the active roster on Saturday, October the 12th. So we didn't report this last week because he was promoted after that, after our last show. So that was actually the day before they played the Steelers. And, of course, he wasn't utilized much, but late in the game he did have a couple of targets for 43 yards. The Chargers are, they're kind of hurting for wide receivers because they keep having them get hurt. So, he's somebody to maybe keep an eye on. He's an undrafted free agent, but if they might utilize him. So I don't see him being a big breakout candidate. I wouldn't go just dropping people to put him on your team unless you just really have the extra space, to kind of take a flyer on him. But anyway, wanted to let everybody know that. And of course, for the injuries as of Tuesday, both Andre Patton and Justin Jackson are still listed as questionable, but I doubt you're playing them anyway, so no big deal there. For the Dolphins, Hakeem Grant is still listed as questionable. Alan Hearns is finally out of the concussion protocol. He played last week against the Redskins. He had 2 targets, 2 receptions, 16 yards. I'm sure everyone that had him kicked themselves for not putting him in your lineup. But, I doubt you'll be playing him anyway in the future because he's just too far down on the depth chart. The Patriots seem to be having a lot of issues with keeping their tight ends, wide receivers, fullbacks, and kickers healthy. I mean, they just seem to be bit by the injury bug. They just placed their second fullback on IR this year. They signed kicker Mike Nugent after placing Steven Gostkowski on IR. And of course, Nugent missed his only field goal attempt this past week. He made a couple the week before, but he's only 8 for 9 on extra points, so he's not looking great. I actually think Belichick is not pleased and confident in him right now. So I wouldn't, unless you just really need a kicker, I wouldn't plan on playing him or thinking that he's going to do what Gostkowski did. So anyway, on the tight end front for the Patriots, just 8 days after releasing Ben Watson, the Patriots re-signed him to the active roster. They didn't want to release him in the first place, but they really didn't have the room. But then when Matt Lacoste was injured last Thursday against the Giants, he's got a sprained MCL, they needed to bring somebody in, so they brought Watson back in. He could actually be starting this week, and he's really not a bad play. So, I mean, if you just really need a tight end, there's so many of them that have been getting injured. He's probably worth picking up and playing. He's familiar with the offense. Brady likes him, respects him quite a bit. In fact, Tom Brady was talking about how their lockers used to be right next to each other, and he just really liked him. So I could see him getting a lot of work.
Well, that would be just like the Patriots, right? I mean, they get these guys like Antonio Brown, and everyone says, oh, you have to wait. You have to see what's going to happen, and he has this huge game. Right. The Patriots don't care. They just throw him in there and let him play.
Belichick, he just wants people who are intelligent, and Ben Watson seems to be pretty intelligent. Now, he's not as fast as he used to be, obviously. I mean, he couldn't make the roster behind all these other guys, but he still has something in him. So if he doesn't make mistakes, they'll get him the ball.
Yeah.
So he'll score a few points for you. They also signed tight end Eric Tomlinson, but do not add him to your roster. He is not a tight end with any fantasy value, so leave him alone. Philip Dorsett, Josh Gordon, N'Keal Harry, all taking part in practice this week. Looking pretty good for all of them, actually. I'd like to see N'Keal Harry back out there. That'd be interesting. Of course, Philip Dorsett's been pretty productive when he's been out there, and we all know what Josh Gordon can do. Rex Burkhead's still listed as questionable, so watch out there. For the Saints, Jeff Duncan of The Athletic reported that Drew Brees believes that he is ahead of schedule in his rehab and is throwing a regulation-size football. He's still listed out, of course, so you're not going to play him this week. Traquan Smith, wide receivers, also still listed as questionable. Alvin Kamara, he's been limited in practice due to an ankle issue, and it doesn't sound like it's getting better, so obviously monitor that situation up until, game time, because there's no telling if he's going to play or not.
Well, and I've also heard the term high ankle injury. They've not said sprain. Right. They've said high ankle injury. But to me, that's even more concerning if it's high ankle and not low ankle.
Sure. So even if he plays, he could be very limited in his playing.
And they're playing the Bears.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Bears.
So the Raiders, Dwayne Harris, he's a wide receiver. He's listed as questionable, but he is expected to play. And just a reminder that the Raiders traded for Zay Jones. We talked about that in our last episode. Hopefully we'll be getting a look at how they're going to use him this week, because he hasn't, last week they were on a bye. And so this week we'll get to see how they're going to use him. They also traded for Trevor Davis before and put him in immediately. So
they don't have a choice. Their wide receivers are dropping like flies.
They are. So as the next one on the list here, Tyrell Williams, he's still listed as questionable. So monitor that. Could be interesting. Buccaneers, fumble and you're out. Bubba Wilson was waived by the Buccaneers after his terrible performance on Sunday. Apparently the same rules do not apply to Jameis Winston. So, Anyway, if you have Bubba Wilson, you can drop him off your team. Wide receiver Brashad Perryman is listed as questionable, but Greg Auman of The Athletic reported that Perryman could be cut from the team in order to help the Bucs gain positions in compensatory draft picks, which is interesting. So you probably wouldn't have Perryman on your team anyway, but if you do, it is safe to drop him as well.
So that's interesting, though. I hadn't seen that. It kind of makes sense. He hasn't been very productive for them, and if that helps them with their draft picks.
They are paying him a lot of money.
Yeah.
I forget how much it was. It's top of my head. I want to say it's $4 million or something. So,
wow.
Yeah, so...
More than you'd think.
Yeah.
They'll just give all that to Chris Godwin.
There you go.
Yeah. He deserves it.
He does.
All right, so I'll kick us off with the NFC East. So Amari, Cobb, and Gallup. Actually, Amari and Cobb did not participate Thursday, and Gallup is limited. So their wide receivers are also dropping like flies, which I think obviously hurts a Dak Prescott. But I'm not sure what you do with them this week. They're playing a very plus matchup against Philadelphia, but it's a division game.
Yeah.
So let's just monitor that. I think you monitor that. If two of those three guys are in, you're starting all of them, I think. But
yeah, it seems like Cooper is maybe not going to play.
Right.
From what I've seen.
So on to Washington. Vernon Davis is questionable with concussion. I want to preface this by saying you're not starting any of these Washington guys this week against San Francisco. So Vernon Davis, Adrian, Case Keenum, and Chris Thompson are all questionable. So Peterson was just for a Veterans Day off, whatever. That's like a senior citizen discount or something, kind of like that.
AARP
card. Yeah. Anyway, so something along those lines. So all those guys are questionable. Keep an eye on those guys. On to Philadelphia. Deshaun Jackson is still day-to-day. Did not participate Thursday. And he also plays on Sunday night. So I think you're taking a risk keeping him in your roster or wishful thinking that he may play Sunday. So you definitely need a different option just in case he's not in there. And Darren Sproles did not participate. He hasn't played the last few weeks, and he really hasn't been productive when he's been in there. So I'm not sure he's really a startable option at this point.
Has helped Miles Sanders look a little better, though.
It has. Jordan Howard's looking better, so I'm not sure where Darren Sproles will fit in there when he comes back.
I'm sure they'll find a spot for him. They always do.
Yes. To the Giants, Sterling Shepard, questionable with a concussion, and Saquon is finally back. So I think Wayne Gallman's questionable, but as long as Saquon's in there, I think he's absolutely the bell cow. I think you guys probably agree. I don't think Wayne Gallman's going to be a startable option or any of the backups, really, as long as Saquon's in there.
It wouldn't surprise me if week one they maybe try to give him a few less carries, but just to kind of get him in the groove. But once
he
he's
only
back
missed
fully,
3 weeks, so
and I don't see it on here, but maybe you're gonna talk about it. Evan Ingram is also back this week.
He's back.
So.
They're practicing.
Yeah.
Yes, we're gonna talk about him a little later.
Okay.
Pittsburgh's on bye. Cincinnati, only one guy. AJ Green is a non-participant. The word on the street is they're evaluating him day to day just to see on a basis of how his ankle responds, but I think from what we see or almost see from him, I don't think he expects to at least return for the next few weeks. So obviously keep an eye on him. I'm not sure where his mindset is. So Cleveland's also on bye. In Baltimore, it seemed like actually the last few weeks Baltimore had a ton of guys on the injury report, but it looks like just Marquise is on for right now. So he's questionable with an ankle injury. He did not participate Thursday, and he was out last week against the Bengals. So keep an eye on him. And on to Chicago. Just one note on their offensive line. They placed Kyle Long, one of their guards, on IR Wednesday. So I'm not sure what that does for David Montgomery's value. I think we're all wanting to see more volume out of him. We kind of had a higher expectation going into the draft. So we'll see what they do moving forward and when Trubisky finally comes back. So
Yep.
Okay, sounds good. Let's get moving on with our next segment. This is trending up, trending down. These are players that are trending, so keep an eye on them. I'll start with Jamison Crowder, wide receiver for the New York Jets. Sam Darnold is back at quarterback. Yay. So in 2 games of this year with Darnold, Crowder has averaged 13.5 targets, 10 receptions, 98 yards per game, 98.5 yards per game. In the 3 games without Darnold, he averaged 4.6 targets, 2.6 receptions, and 25 yards. Seems to be a little bit of improvement with Darnold there. Now I know it's only a 2-game sample size basically with Darnold, but Darnold's a difference maker. I mean, we all agree he's a really good quarterback. I expect Jamison to continue to play well. In fact, I even believe this week, against the Patriots, he could have a really good day. We talked about this before, but like you said, Adam, we know Patriots are going to key in on Lev Bell. We also know they're going to take out Robbie Anderson, or at least try, right, with their double team the way they do. Jameson could be in for a good day. I don't think that the game is going to be as lopsided towards the Patriots as many people think. I think the Jets actually have a good shot at winning the game and at least staying in it. So it's going to be fun to watch. It'd be interesting.
Yeah, my concern is if it is a close game, which I kind of agree, I think it will be, it's probably going to be a close, low-scoring game. So that helps with the Jamison Crowder guy, like you were saying, but a Robbie Anderson, I'm trying not to play those guys if possible.
I'd be scared to play Robbie.
Yeah.
I'd maybe even be scared to play Lev Bell a little bit, but
I don't think you have a choice. But
exactly,
yeah,
right.
Okay, I'll move on to my trending up players. I have two this week. The first one, we've talked about him before, Alden Tate. He's looked good. It's not like he's going out there and he's just receiving targets because he's a body out there. He's actually looked like a pretty good wide receiver.
He does. And
his snap percentage, week 2 was 36%, week 3 jumped to 89, week 4 was 91, week 5 was 100, and last week he was down to 90%. So he's hovering around the 90% at this point. And, as you talked about with A.J. Green's injury, it wouldn't surprise me if they try to trade him if they're comfortable with Tate as their wide receiver 2 option, with Boyd being their wide receiver 1, and try to get back what they can for him. And, that may be better for A.J. Green, too, to be on a team where he doesn't have to be the focal point quite as much and may help with that rehab. So, to me, if you can go get Alden Tate, and I'm actually the owner in our Dynasty League, and even I didn't realize how good he has been until I went back and started watching some film and looking at his scores and stuff. So, I think people out there that own him maybe own him and haven't really been playing him, haven't been paying much attention, so you may be able to get him cheaper than you should. And then my other guy, I kind of mentioned him already, but it's Alan Lazard. Early in the year, you brought up Jake Kummerow as a sleeper, and the main reasons were Aaron Rodgers likes Jake Kummerow. He's a big target, and he plays for the Packers. I mean, the Packers are just a good offense, so if you can get a piece of that, that's all true of Alan Lazard as well.
It is.
He's 6'3", 225 pounds. This week, he's pretty much the only wide receiver that's going to play, it seems like. And so I just went and looked at his player profiler. He has an 88th% adjusted speed score, meaning basically he's really fast for his size, 74% burst score, 73% catch radius, and he's a 61% college dominator and a 72% college breakout. College breakout and college dominator are the two top driving factors for whether or not a wide receiver is going to do well in the NFL, and he's above the threshold on both of those. So on top of that, you have Aaron Rodgers talking him up and likes him. I think he's a really good target right now if he's out there on your waiver wire to go pick him up. And if you hit on him, you got him for basically free. If you don't hit on him, you cut bait in a few weeks and move on.
Right.
Yeah, so I just actually want to give a piece of note because we just talked about Dallas and Amari, and I just got an update that said he's preparing to play through the quad injury this week. Okay. So that's very positive news for the Amari owner and the Dak owner if he's going to play. So
and the Cowboys fan.
It is. Yeah, I wasn't going to mention that. Yeah, so my guy, we mentioned him a little earlier, but it's Luke Wilson. I think I put him in this trending up section because for obvious reasons. Obviously, though, number 1 tight end on that team who's had a fantastic offense so far this year and has probably the best statistical, at least maybe fantasy statistical quarterback playing the game right now in Russell Wilson. So Luke Wilson steps up as the tight end 1 for the Seahawks. I think the only questions are he's been with the team since 2013 and we just haven't seen much from him in the past. So I looked up his best year that he's had with them, which was in 2014. He caught 22 balls for 362 yards and 3 touchdowns. But you're right. We had talked about this a little bit earlier that he had some injuries early in his career. So I think this is his maybe first opportunity to step up as the tight end 1 on a team that seems to really move toward that tight end more and more as Russell Wilson gets further on in his career. So I definitely think, I'm not sure that he's a guy that you start with confidence this week, but he's definitely a guy you go out and get and look and see what happens moving forward. So.
Yeah, talking about, the difference of Luke Wilson and not having a great time in the past, they just haven't used those tight ends in the past. I mean, for a long time, they had Doug Baldwin and Tyler Lockett were their receiving options, and then they had the running back, whether it be Marshawn Lynch or whoever it was. That was kind of their offense. Well, they've changed now to where they're starting to rely on that tight end. So even though Luke Wilson hasn't had that yet, that doesn't mean he won't. And as we've seen time and time again with tight ends, it takes them a long time. So, he starts young, doesn't do very well. Now that he's got some experience and, been through it a little bit, and maybe he'll have his, I'm not going to say he's going to break out, but he'll be solid, someone you can actually play.
And he just has lots of years with Russell Wilson. That they
Yeah.
know each other, and I think that adds a lot of value to him. So, yeah, we'll see how they use him moving forward, but we all know how thin the tight end position has been this year. So he's definitely a stash guy, and I'm almost positive he's available in any of your leagues. So.
Yeah, I think he probably is.
All right. Let's move on to the trending down part of this segment. Adam, why don't you keep us going?
Yeah, so I may make a few people mad about this one, I'm not sure, but my trending down guy is actually Aaron Rodgers. And I'm going to start by saying, obviously, we're the Dynasty guys, so we're talking about a Dynasty aspect, or I am at least for Aaron Rodgers right now. And I think, and this is just my opinion of him, when I watch him, he's still a great NFL quarterback, but he just has not consistently put up the numbers that he has in the past. And if I am the Aaron Rodgers owner, and this is advice to anyone that owns him, if I had him, I'm trying to move him now. I think his name value and just the price you can get for him right now is going to be the highest that it's going to be. It seems that team has moved in a direction with LaFleur there, which I didn't think they would when they started the season. I thought they were going to hand the reins to Aaron Rodgers. He's going to be throwing the ball all over the yard, but they seem to lean a little heavier on their run than I actually assumed they would. So He's currently the QB 11. I kind of preface this by saying 8 teams have had their buys, so take that for what it's worth. So.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think, to repeat what I said before, I just think it's a good time to try to get what you can out of him, and we can kind of discuss the quarterback position a little later, but he's definitely a trending down guy for me.
Well, one thing you note here that you didn't bring up, but I think is also very important, is they're winning. If they continue to win like this, just as we've seen with the Vikings and what's happening there with, even though they have great wide receivers, they aren't necessarily using them. They're not going to change. And that, I agree, for fantasy, that's really scary because Aaron Rodgers has not had a huge game yet this year, and they're winning. They're as good as they're going to do.
Well, I'm glad you brought that also up because it reminded me that, Devontae Adams, we have no idea what his timeline to return is. There's rumors that it wasn't just turf toe, that it's ligament damage. So I'm going to almost assume that Aaron Rodgers' value is not going to go up throwing to Lazard. As good as Lazard of a wide receiver option may be, he's not the best option for Aaron
he's not
Rodgers.
Devontae Adams.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think that still is going to hurt Aaron Rodgers' value moving forward. So.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing with Aaron is he can still go out and throw 4 or 5 touchdowns in a game. The problem is he's not throwing consistently.
Yes.
2 or 3 is what we expected him to do.
Right.
So,
and if you can move him for a first-round pick or wide receiver 1 or an RB1, and you play somebody like a Matt Stafford, are you really losing that much value?
Yeah.
I mean, and we can debate who's a good comp right now to him, but I just think he's almost moved himself into that category.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you watch him play, he just seems frustrated all the time. Like, you can tell things aren't going the way that he wants, and typically he turns that around, but he hasn't this year. So it's kind of an interesting dynamic to watch play out.
Mm-hmm. All right, so my trending down player is O.J. Howard, tight end for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Obviously, he's been a bit of a disappointment this year. He's just not involved as much in the offense as, of course, we all want. His coaches keep saying, we're going to get him more involved, but they're not. He's only averaging 3 targets per game. Now, I think game 2 he had 0 catches or 0 targets. So, he had a few more in the rest of the games. But, still, he had 0. So, and even the 3 targets per game, I think he's only catching a couple of those. So, he's just not producing. If you're really desperate for a tight end, you could still play him. I just wouldn't. Of course, you're not going to play him this week because he's on bye, but
It'd be about the same production.
it would be about the same production.
Him and Kyle Rudolph.
Yeah, but he might be somebody, if you know anyone in your league that is a big O.J. Howard fan that believes has high expectations for him, and you want to trade for somebody else, I would do it, but. Anyway,
and to add to your point, it's a really frustrating thing because I think when we watch him play, we see all the talent that he has. And we saw a few weeks ago how Byron Leftwich and I think Jameis Winston even came out and was talking about how they're really going to work on getting OJ the ball. And it almost feels like they're doing that to build up his confidence. OJ has struggled to catch the ball. They almost have to reassure him that they're going to be working him into the game plan. So I just think that if they're putting that out in the media, that they're going to be working the ball to him, and it still just hasn't happened, I just think that the confidence isn't there right now. So that's the frustrating part. We see how talented he is and how great he can be, but it's just not there right now.
Yeah.
Well, you made a great point earlier today. We were discussing this. In fact, if you want to share it, that'd be great. But
Well, so I don't necessarily want to compare it to other sports, but in every sport, there's a mental side of the sport. And the comp that I have for this is you see these shooters in basketball, and basically the saying in basketball is shoot or shoot. If you don't shoot, you cannot get in a groove. And we live in Oklahoma. We're Oklahoma City Thunder fans, or at least I am. You see these guys that are great shooters come to the Thunder, and they cannot hit a shot to save their life. And you just don't understand what the deal is. And the problem is they're not in a rhythm. They get thrown in there. Russell Westbrook drives in the lane, throws the ball out to them, and they miss the shot. And it's because they can't get in a groove. They're not comfortable. They're not used to that being there. When it's there, they kind of freak out. They don't know what to do. So I wonder if the same thing is happening with O.J. Howard. He has no confidence, and he's not getting targeted. So when he does get targeted, it's almost like, oh, there's a football right there, and it surprises him, and he doesn't know what to do, and he either drops the ball or, he's not in the right position to have a yard after catch situation or anything like that. So it's interesting, and I don't know if this is happening, but I could see it where, it's not just a confidence thing. It's I don't want to call it a lack of focus, but just not being in the groove. You overthink everything, and you just really get in your own head.
yeah, not getting in the rhythm. And I think we talked we would like to see them target him, for at least 2 or 3 games in a row. Hey, give him 7 or 8 targets. Let's see what he can do, and let's see if he can start catching them and get in the rhythm. Then if you back his target off a little bit, maybe he'll still produce.
Yeah, because he's comfortable again.
Yeah, he's feeling it.
He's thinking instead of playing.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Absolute problem.
But we haven't seen that happen yet. So
Right.
Yeah, even though they keep saying they're going to.
even though they keep talking about it.
Okay, so we'll move on to mine. Mine is kind of the low-hanging fruit here, but it's the Titans. Pretty much everyone aside from Derrick Henry. Obviously, Marcus Mariota, you're pretty much done with him at this point. But as we talked about, this is going to be interesting to see how this affects the wide receivers and the tight ends here. I think Delaney Walker is probably trending down because him and Mariota had that connection. And A.J. Brown seemed to kind of be getting that connection as well. But, to me, I don't trust them right now like I would. But there's a possibility that with Tannehill, they have a better chemistry and get better. We just don't know that. So right now, I would say they're trending down, but who knows what happens in the long run.
And someone may agree those guys may be good trade targets.
Yeah.
Maybe they can get them for absolutely dirt cheap, absolutely nothing. So
Great segue, Adam.
Yes.
Let's move on to our trade targets section. So, Eric, why don't you keep us going with this one?
Okay, my trade target is one of my favorite players, partly because I have him, but partly just because I like him. It's DJ Moore. He's been really consistent this year. I don't think a lot of people realize how good he is. He is the number 21 wide receiver on the year, and he has 1 touchdown. You have to assume that he's going to have more than 1 touchdown per 6 games played. And if that's the case, he's only going to get better. He's got a very young, inexperienced quarterback that's throwing him the ball. And he's also very young and inexperienced. I think he's 22 years old. So you've got this guy who has shown that he has the potential and is in an offense that's getting more consistent. But I don't think a lot of people realize how good he is so far. And I think you may be able to get him right before the breakout happens because it could be happening any week now. So to me, if you can go out and get DJ Moore, I'm on board. I think you could give up a lot for him, and you would probably be okay with it.
Oh, I definitely agree. Yeah, so I'll move on to this guy. We've talked about him in the past a little bit, but my guy's Joe Mixon.
Boo.
He's a hater,
Yeah.
but that's okay because here's the thing with Joe Mixon, and I'm actually obviously we're in Dynasty again, so we're talking about this guy's long-term value. I want to preface this by saying that this year I think it's going to get worse before it gets better with that team. You talked about the Rams' offensive line. This team rivals how poor that offensive line is. I mean, whether it's injuries, guys just moving in and out of the lineup. I mean, you look at the injury report, and they've got 3 offensive linemen every single week that are questionable or not
Well, and
playing.
they also don't have McVay,
Right.
which
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Exactly. They've got a first-time head coach that
Yeah.
we just have no idea what they're going to do. And exactly, Mixon is averaging 8 points per game. I mean, I think before the season, if you tell me that,
yikes,
yeah, you're not taking him where his ADP is.
not anywhere close.
And, as someone who has him in a keeper league, I could see somebody coming to me and trying to steal him from me. So that's exactly why I think he's a great trade target. I think things are only going to get better for him. Like you mentioned before, they've got a brand new head coach who's definitely an offensive-minded guy. So I certainly think that works in his favor. And obviously, they're the armpit of the league right now, so they're going to have high draft picks. I could almost see them taking another offensive lineman. They took an offensive lineman 11th overall last year out of Alabama. The year before with their first-round pick, they took an offensive lineman who was their left tackle. I mentioned him here. Actually, I can't remember his name right now. Cordy Glenn. But anyway, he's also injured this year. So they've got first-round talent on the offensive line position, but they just can't get him healthy. So I think definitely looking to his future value, he's going to be an awesome option. I mean, they're going to move the football. It's just you're going to have to ride out the wave. So definitely, if I'm looking at somebody and they drafted Joe Mixon and they either are frustrated by him or maybe they don't need him, maybe he's working in and out of their flex, definitely go get him. I mean, I definitely think this is going to be the lowest his value is ever going to be. We see the talent from him. He can catch the football. You had mentioned a stat earlier that I didn't write down, but just I think in the last 2 weeks, he's only ran out on 20 routes or something. And in comparison to Lev Bell, it was double that amount or
in a week.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's just obviously that's going to work in Joe Mixon's favor. So.
Yeah. The thing about Joe Mixon too is Andy Dalton is his quarterback, and it's not going to get much worse from there. And from a dynasty's perspective, they could end up getting someone that's a lot more productive as a quarterback, and that's only going to help Joe Mixon's production.
Right.
Okay, so let's move on to the next segment. We have a player here we want to talk about. This segment's called Freaking Out. So we're going to talk about Jameis Winston, quarterback, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Last week, he was 30 for 54, 400 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 fumbles, which he only lost 1, which is great. But then,
I was going to say quarterback in name only.
5, yeah.
That's on his name tag.
Yeah. But he ended all that with 5 interceptions. Wow. How can he go from awful the first week to pretty good for 4 weeks in a row and then drop a stink bomb like this one? I don't know. He seems to make some progress for a few weeks, and then it's back to poor decisions. He made a lot of poor decisions this past week. I watched the game and then rewatched it, and it was like it was just crazy. There was not all the interceptions are his fault. I'll give him that, but most of them were, and it just doesn't seem like he's making that mental progress that we all hoped. I think he still has the potential to put up some big numbers, but how long is he going to last? I mean, Bruce Arians is going to stick with him right now because he really doesn't have a better option, but I don't know. What do you guys think?
Well, I'll go ahead and start this by saying, too, that we've never actually mentioned this on air, but this is Tim and I have a little wager on the outside of this, talking about basically comparing Dak Prescott and Jameis Winston. And actually, to be honest, they're pretty comparable. But I say that to say that by you basically telling us, how awful he's been, it's almost like we had such high expectations for this guy. I mean, how much better weapons can they possibly provide for him? I mean, obviously they could provide a better offensive line, a better running game, but he's got the best offensive weapons in the game. So I think the really frustrating thing, to reiterate what you're saying, is Jameis Winston looks to improve. I mean, he has one of the best offensive-minded head coaches of all time. He's proved it over and over again that he takes quarterbacks. He's the quarterback whisperer, as they say. But for whatever reason, he's not whispering to Jameis Winston, or he's not listening. So I think I definitely agree with you that is the frustrating part, that even if his stats seem to show up, what you're watching is hard to watch. So I think that's the frustrating part for me. But what do you think?
Yeah, so Jameis Winston. I'm not a huge Jameis Winston fan. Not necessarily just because of his fantasy side. I mean, he obviously has a lot of upside, but I tend to believe that if you're a bad quarterback in the NFL, eventually that's going to catch up to you fantasy-wise. And he's a bad quarterback in the NFL right now. Anybody that throws 5 interceptions in one game is a bad quarterback. And like you said, he does have really, really good weapons as far as receiving goes. The thing is, you also have seen this with other people that Bruce Arians has coached. When he was at Arizona, his first year with Carson Palmer threw, I think it was 16 interceptions, which, granted, if you do 5 a week, you're way higher than 16, but he threw a lot of interceptions that year. And I don't know if it's the process the quarterback has to go through to hit their reads. But this is something that has been proven that happens with Bruce Arians quarterbacks. They throw interceptions until they get used to that offense. But this is a little different scenario because Jameis Winston has always thrown interceptions. So it's really hard to know if it's Jameis, if it's Bruce Arians, if it's a little bit of both. I personally am not a big Jameis fan, and I haven't been, but that doesn't mean that he's not going to be good. I can see a path for him still to be a top 5 quarterback. I know you're you're probably the highest on Jameis out of the 3 of us. So, I mean, what do you think?
I had the most optimism for him. I still think he's got a lot of talent. I just don't see him learning. I don't see the progress, and that's what frustrates me with the whole thing. And so, if you have him on your dynasty team, which I do, but luckily I've got somebody named Patrick Mahomes in front of him, so I'm okay. But let's say you don't. Let's say you drafted, Drew Brees or Cam Newton, and then you picked up Jameis as your option, your second quarterback. Now what do you do? Do you stick with Jameis? I mean, if he comes up against a better matchup, he could throw for 4 or 5 touchdowns in a week. I mean, he still has to me, a really high ceiling.
Yeah.
But his floor is just bottomed out. So I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to move on from him because I still feel like he has talent, but I'm less optimistic than I was.
Well, I mean, you just look at this stat line. 30 for 54, 400 yards.
Right.
That sounds pretty good outside of the interceptions. If he could just keep that down to 2, he's going to be a startable asset. I mean, he threw 5 interceptions and had 2 fumbles. Of course, he only lost one of them and still scored 17 points in our league of record.
Right.
And he had 1 touchdown.
Right.
So if he keeps that to 2 interceptions with 2 touchdowns and 400 yards, he's really good.
Yeah.
So it doesn't take a lot of tweaking for him to get there, which is why he's such an interesting person to try to project.
Yeah, but so here's a good question. If you have him and you have Gardner Minshew, who are you starting? I mean, who are you more confident in starting?
It depends on the matchup.
Yeah.
If I need a home run, I'm going with Jameis. If I need, if I think I'm going to win by 20, I probably start Gardner, knowing that he's probably going to get you 15 or 20.
I mean, even or a Daniel Jones type, I definitely see with Gardner Minshew, the floor feels like it's higher than Jameis is, but the ceiling definitely isn't there. So,
right.
Yeah,
I definitely think if you can move Jameis, if you're in a situation where you have Drew Brees and you have Jameis, I can't see you not panicking at this point. I mean,
I'm sure, you're panicking, but again, he threw 5 interceptions and still scored 17 points. I mean, that's not great, but it doesn't kill your team that week.
Right. Well, and we debate this all the time, but he came out of the draft in Mariota's draft. And I see those two as eerily similar. I mean, we talked about Gabbert coming back. I'm not so sure Jameis is going to finish out the season. And we talked about this before the season. And basically, with our discussion, we were like, well, if they bench Jameis, then he must be absolutely horrible if they bench him for him. So,
right.
Anyway, I just preface that by saying I would be I'm frustrated with Jameis. And I felt like I was almost the lowest on him. So I definitely expected more out of him, but it's a long season, so.
Well, yeah, and to go back to our segment title, freaking out, I mean, it's understandable if you are, and it would be understandable if you want to try to move him or, to somebody that may have higher optimism about him like I do. But it's also, I don't think, a bad decision just to hold on to him. If you especially if you can't get anything of value for him, just hold on to him and just see what happens. Ride it out.
Okay, so I want to play the name game here. Let's throw a few options out there and see where you guys are at. Jameis or Matt Stafford?
I'm taking Stafford, but
I'm talking in a dynasty.
Yes, I'm still taking Stafford, and here's why. Go. You can answer too, but the reason another reason I'm so low on Jameis is because he's in the 5th year of his contract, and they still haven't signed him. Even the team doesn't believe in him. So here's the thing: that's why I mentioned his wide receiver weapons before. Because say that he moves to, I don't know, Atlanta. I have no idea. They have good wide receiving core. I don't see him being better anywhere else than he is right now. His fantasy value right now, he threw 54 passes. Do you think he's going to throw that on another team not named the Bengals? I mean, so that's, I guess, my point with Jameis. He's almost reached, if he cannot get rid of his woes with the turnovers, he's almost reached as far as he can reach, in my opinion. So.
Yeah. So,
So my answer goes back to what we talked about a while ago about the the ceiling for Winston, because I don't see Stafford in the system he's in now throwing 4 or 5 touchdowns in a week. I see 2, 3 on a good week.
Yeah.
So if I have a team with like a Mahomes or a Watson or somebody like that who I know can get me those high weeks, and I need him for a bye replacement or something like that, then I'm gonna probably keep Winston because I want to swing for the fences. So, and I'm not a huge Stafford fan. So, I mean, it's really not fair for me to say that. And of course, as we know, I still believe in Winston less than I did, but
okay. So I'm going to throw a few more out there.
Sure, okay.
You guys can just throw out your answer quick. Matt Ryan, obviously better, but older.
I would.
You would take Matt Ryan.
I would take him. I think it would depend also on your team makeup, but I think I'm taking him. I still think Matt Ryan has 4-ish at least good years in him. That's fair. So,
Tim?
I think it depends on your team.
Okay.
Again, yeah.
Okay, last one, Kirk Cousins.
Gosh, that's a really hard one.
I'll keep Jameis.
Yeah, I think I would take Jameis.
I think I would as well. I just don't see Kirk Cousins having a ceiling at all, and he doesn't have a great floor either.
I agree.
Okay, well, let's move on to the next segment. This is our last segment. We talk about kind of forecast players that are gonna have good weeks, bad weeks, and good weeks that may seem ugly at first. But anyway, this segment is called The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And we're going to start with the good. Obviously, this is players who we feel like are going to have a good week, better than usual. So, Eric, why don't you get us kicked off on this?
Okay, so my good player this week is Jared Goff. He has had a terrible week. Last week, I think he actually had negative points in a lot of leagues. But he's playing the Falcons, and the Falcons, here's their average line for the last 4 weeks: 326 yards and 3.25 touchdowns to the opposing quarterback. And that includes games against Marcus Mariota, no longer a starter, and Jacoby Brissett, who has been good but not incredible. If Jared Goff gets half of that, you're probably okay. And I expect him to get much more than that. We were talking about weapons with Jameis. He has maybe the best wide receiving core in the nation, and he has good running backs. Just has a bad line. So I think this week could be a really good week for him, even though he's been down this year.
All right, excellent. Adam.
Yeah, so this is a guy we talked about earlier, but Evan Ingram, he was back in practice, and he's also playing 32nd ranked defense against opposing tight ends. So I think you definitely look for him to bounce back off the injury and have a huge week for you.
I hope he does. So my guy is Leonard Fournette this week, running back, Jacksonville Jaguars. I think we all know who he is. Do you guys know who allows the most rushing yards by opposing running backs?
I do, because I'm looking at it, but I didn't before that.
The Cincinnati Bengals. They've allowed on average over 180 yards per game.
And they rush for the least. That's hilarious.
Yeah. So do you guys know who Fournette's playing this week?
I have a guess.
Cincinnati. So Fournette rushed for 225 yards against the Broncos. Now, the Broncos have improved since then, so they weren't playing their best at that time. But the Broncos were only averaging 111 yards allowed per game. So, I mean, we're talking about an extra 70 yards for a guy who had 225. So I'm not saying he's even going to rush for 225 yards again, but I think he's got a very realistic chance of hitting 200. I really do. So we'll see how that goes. All right, let's move on to the bad. Adam, why don't you get us kicked off on this?
Okay, Tim's not going to like to hear this, but my bad guy for the week is Melvin Gordon.
Hey, he scares me too.
Yeah, and that's the thing. We're not scared about his talent. We're definitely not questioning that. But he's playing against Tennessee, who's ranked 8th against opposing running backs, and he just has a few question marks that work against him. Obviously, his timeshare with Austin Eckler, we have questions about. We don't know what they're going to do moving forward, and we just have no idea how his body feels after finally coming back. He didn't play for 4 or 5 weeks, and it's just a different thing getting into game shape. So, and yeah, I just think playing Tennessee this week off their quarterback change also adds a little bit of sort of hype to the Titans. Yep. So I think both those things are playing against him. So definitely temper expectations for Melvin Gordon, but I definitely see the opportunity to start him as a low-end flex option. I mean, he's definitely a startable option. Just don't expect too much out of him.
Yep.
Okay. So my bad player of the week is Adrian Peterson. Actually had him as my good player of the week last week, but this is a completely different situation. So now they're facing San Francisco this week. The 49ers are, yes, very good against the run. They allowed, I think, 75 yards to Ronald Jones. Joe Mixon.
Boo.
Yeah. Joe Mixon had 11 carries for 17 yards in week 2. James Conner, 13 carries for 43 yards in week 3. Of course, they were on a bye in week 4. Nick Chubb, 16 carries for 87 yards, but no touchdown. And then Malcolm Brown, 11 for 40, along with Darrell Henderson, 6 for 39, 0 touchdowns. So I don't see Adrian Peterson getting much this week at all. I also just want to throw another one in here, a special mention for Allen Robinson. Not so special mention, I guess I should say. He's, of course, wide receiver for the Bears, facing the New Orleans Saints, Marshawn Lattimore. Lattimore's held Amari Cooper, Mike Evans, and DJ Chark to almost nothing the last 3 weeks. So Robinson could be in for a very tough week.
Yep. Okay, and my bad player this week is Cortland Sutton. Cortland Sutton has had a really good year so far, and he's playing the Chiefs this week. And when I hear someone is playing the Chiefs, I automatically think that's a favorable matchup.
Start 'em.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's what it goes through your mind.
Right.
But they've only allowed one receiver to go over the 100-yard mark this year, and that was DJ Chark in week 1, and no one knew who he was or what he was going to become. So I kind of throw that one out. The rest of the year, the leading receiver against them has averaged 62 yards and about 5 catches, and only one time has that actually been a wide receiver. Most of the time it's a tight end. So Cortland Sutton this week, I would not expect for him to hit those marks that he's been hitting. I think he's going to have a bad week.
Okay. So now we come to the last part of this segment called The Ugly. These are players we want to reiterate that are may not look great in your lineup. You're kind of like, I hate to put him in there, but we really feel like they're probably going to have a decent week. So, Adam, who you got?
Okay, so this is kind of a tough situation because I was actually just further thinking upon this. But I'm going to stay with the same guy, or the Denver Broncos. So, Royce Freeman, they may be great against wide receiver ones or outside wide receivers, but they're ranked 26th against opposing running backs. Here's the dilemma with him. He plays on a Thursday night, and he's typically a flex option. But I think this matchup and his ability, I mean, he's averaging around 10-ish points per week. I definitely think, and I definitely advise you put him in your RB2 slot. Obviously I wanted to mention that, but I definitely think he has a good week this week. They're using him more in the passing game, and obviously in PPR formats, he's a good start this week.
I think it's a smart play. We've seen the last 2 weeks that the formula for beating the Kansas City Chiefs is to keep the ball out of Patrick Mahomes' hands. How you do that, you run the ball, right? So I feel like that's probably what Denver's going to try and do, both with Freeman and Lindsey. But Freeman's probably not the one you're starting as much as Lindsey. So definitely a good start in the ugly category.
Well, to compound on that, I just wanted to throw this out there. When you see Royce Freeman and Phillip Lindsay on the same team, and then you watch who has had success against the Chiefs, it's the Royce Freeman type of running back, not the Phillip Lindsay type of running back. It's that bruising running back that gets 5 yards a carry, doesn't necessarily break a long run, but he can grind them down and keep that offense their offense on the field, the Chiefs' offense off the field. Those are the guys that succeed. So as a Phillip Lindsay owner, it would not surprise me at all if Royce Freeman actually had the better week just because of the way that they're trying to make that game work.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and I mean, like I was saying earlier, he's averaging 9 points a week, and he has yet to score a touchdown this year. I mean, give him 9 points and a touchdown. That's a great week for running backs. So.
Yep, I would take it. So my ugly player is somebody that Eric's already brought up just a little while ago, Jared Goff. And I've got him in this section because you might be out there thinking he hasn't played that well, all year, and maybe you just don't want to put him out there. Last week he was 13 of 24 for 78 yards and 0 touchdowns. I mean, that was pretty poor. But that was against San Francisco 49ers. This week he faces the Atlanta Falcons. We've already talked about them. They give up a lot of points. As opposed to San Francisco in yards, San Francisco allows an average of 150 pass yards per game. Atlanta allows almost double that at 271. So, the Rams have to be looking to get back on track. Just as we talked about earlier, they may not have Gurley, Malcolm Brown's, banged up. So they might try to get air the ball out a little bit more. I think they need to get Goff a little more confident as well. So I look for all of their wide receivers probably to have a good game. And I just feel like he's a very safe play.
Yep. Obviously, I agree.
You do?
Yeah. Yes. Okay, and this is the ugly segment, and sometimes it feels like insert Bills player here, and that kind of works, so I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
We'll go with Cole Beasley. Speaking of Miami, he's playing Miami, and I have here enough said. He's playing Miami. You start all your players against Miami, but he has over 10 fantasy points in 3 of the last 5 games, and he's coming off of a bad week where he had 3.6 points, which is his lowest score of the year. I'm sure he's not happy with that, and he'll look to improve on that. And basically, it's like taking candy from a baby playing against the Dolphins. So I feel like Cole Beasley's going to have another 10 or 12 fantasy points and be solid for you.
I could see it.
All right, well, great. Well, that wraps up our show. Do you guys have any last comments?
No, we're kind of getting to the doldrums of fantasy where the shine has worn off and we're not yet to the playoffs. So keep staying connected and trying to figure out, good roster moves and stuff like that, because a lot of times this is when people give up, and it's exactly what you don't want to do.
You don't. You can be what are we? We could be. You could be 1-5 right now or something, and still make the playoffs. So anything can happen.
Leagues are not won and lost at the draft. They're won and lost typically on the waiver wire and through trade targets. So now's the time to be moving.
And the teams that could be blowing everybody away in your league could have an injury or two, and you're right back in it. So keep plugging away. All right. Well, good luck to everybody. That's a wrap for our show today. Thank you for listening to our podcast. We'd love to hear from you. Please send us an email at dynastyguysff@gmail.com. That's dynastyguysff@gmail.com. And you can follow us on Twitter at dynastyguysff. Thanks again for listening. Please join us on our next podcast. See ya.
Have a good week.
Appreciate it.